Shifting sands or structural transformation, that is a loaded question that, in fact, I often find myself personally asking as well as we report on some of the biggest global stories shaping our world today. And I think it perfectly encapsulates the kind of challenges and the opportunities that we are witnessing around the world. And over the next over the course of this conversation, we hope to touch upon those challenges, but also look at the many ways in which they can be navigated, also the converging points that geopolitics and technology really have. So what role can technology play when it comes to just maneuvering the shifting dynamics that we are seeing around us? Are those shifting sands, are they coming with a sense of permanence? Are we seeing a shift towards a new world order? What about India navigating those opportunities and challenges? So that's just a brief overview of what lies ahead as far as this conversation is concerned. And I'm personally very excited to delve into those aspects with our lovely panelists. So we will also be turning to our audience towards the end of that session. So that's in store for the next 30 minutes for us. Beginning with Ambassador Ellis, let's just talk about the way in which we've seen the relationship between the UK and India come about. What, to your mind, is the biggest challenge at this point?
Thanks very much. The biggest challenge is, on the UK side, is the adaptation to, I wouldn't quite call it a new world order, but a very different world from the world of even 15 or 20 years ago, and how the UK and India can make the most of that. It's not for me to tell India what its biggest challenge is, but I think that I've just come out of the FTA talks today. That is one of the ways. We are essentially creating a series of frameworks. We've done it on mobility. I hope we can do it on tech. We're in the middle of doing it on defense, which establish a different kind of partnership with India. There's always a possibility between the UK and India in falling back into the past, and that can be scratchy sometimes, but what I see is a big determination on both sides to look to the future. We're not alone in that. The United States is doing it. All countries are doing it. If I could sneak in, I was thinking about your question and the subject of the panel. I would say that it's not that it's either shifting sands or kind of structural change. I think the structural change in the world is two shifting sands. That the familiar structures which I joined the diplomatic service with, which were difficult but clear, have essentially broken down. So you do have some new patterns which I think will last for a long time, of which the rise of India and this region is definitely one. But what that's led to is essentially a state of shifting sands. And I don't think that's a kind of temporary phase. I think that's just how the world is.
That's interesting, and it's a very refreshing way to look at it as well. But at the same time, when we look at the way in which this relationship has to be navigated, there are multiple opportunities when it comes to the spheres of technology, and we will come to that in just a bit. I want to begin by also asking even Figgenbaum about the way in which we're looking at the shifting sands. What about the role that India can play as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned to actually navigate the China challenge? Because when it comes to solidification of the relationship that India has with the United States, there's that obvious question that comes to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley will agree with me on this. I've been involved with this part of the world for 30 years. It's changed really dramatically. And if you ask most people how it's changed, they'll usually give you a stock answer. They'll say it's because of the rapid rise of China and economic change. But I would frame it a little bit differently. I think the central strategic dynamic in this part of the world is what I would call the collision between economics and security. Or to put that another way, between economic integration and security fragmentation. The same countries that are trading, building, investing, innovating, and growing together also, in many cases, are beset by powerful nationalisms, security tensions, territorial claims, they're building blue water navies, and in many cases, they're arming for conflict. China, the country that you mentioned, is at the center of much of that. And so navigating that tension so that the region can reap the benefits of economic integration while mitigating some of those security tensions, that's the challenge. I think the problem that India has in the first instance, and I'm going to be blunt about this, the United States has the same problem, is that a lot of the next generation economic integration, particularly on trade and investment standards, is being driven by pacts and agreements that both India and the United States are on the outside of looking in. Let's just take trade standards. There's 3 agreements: the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, and something called the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, the DEPA, 3 agreements. Who's on the outside of not 1, not 2, but all 3 of those? My country, the United States. And you know who else is on the outside of not 1, not 2, but all 3? India. So for all that the United States likes to frame its strategy around the Indo-Pacific, in this space, the trade standard setting space, the largest economy in the Indo and the largest economy across the Pacific are both missing in action. And if you have no Indo and you have no Pacific, then the centrality of Asia becomes into the fore. And so I think India faces some of the same challenges that the United States faces. And this is something that's come up a lot at this tech summit, which is to discover how to be a standard-setting nation in ways that drive norms, standards, rules across the region, particularly in the economic space, in order to mitigate some of that security tension. My country is falling short on that. And I think for India, it's a challenge that the United States clearly hopes India will step up to.
Ash, tell us, do you see that happening? Also, earlier in the year, you had penned an article which talked about how America is placing, quote unquote, a bad bet on India. As far as the fact is that, well, India might not side with the US when it comes to a conflict with China. Why do you think the US is placing that bet in the first place, if it's a bad one? Is that a calculated move, or do we see a course correction happening, if at all? But then again, what are America's options? So there is a shared understanding, of course, as far as US and India are concerned, that this is a partnership that we are taking forward for multiple reasons, because there are these convergences as well.
Okay, so thank you, Molly, for first asking me the trick question, right? I am in the eternal debt to my editors at Foreign Affairs for having given me 15 minutes of unintended fame. I wish they had given me 15 minutes or $15 million in unearned income because of that piece.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, unfortunately, I had no such luck. But to answer the question more seriously, the US bet on India hinges not on what India does for us. The US bet on India hinges on what India can become for itself. And if India becomes a capable state which is part of a stable balance of power in Asia, that India is an asset to the United States. Anything else that India does in addition to achieving that status as a capable state, from my perspective, is gravy. So would we like in India to do things for us? Absolutely. But can we live with an India that serves our interests simply by becoming more capable, more confident, and contributing towards a multipolar Asia? That, for me, is the big win. And whether India gets there really depends on the choices that it makes fundamentally at home.
I was just coming to that. So would that not be a reciprocal act then, in terms of what India also receives from the United States as far as that understanding is concerned?
So I think the United States now, for at least 25 years, going back to President Clinton's famous visit to India, has made the bet in the following terms. We recognize that the choices India makes will be determinative for its own trajectory. But there are things that we can do to assist. And we have done some pretty bold things to assist India over the last 25 years. And the amazing thing, when I look back at this history, is that successive administrations in the United States have not stopped doing dramatic things. And why are we doing this? I would argue that at the end of the day, we are doing this fundamentally out of enlightened self-interest. And that enlightened self-interest is that we think Asia and the world becomes a better place, it becomes a safer place for our interests, if India becomes capable, and if the US-India relationship remains robust. That is a self-interested calculation on the part of the United States. And if India becomes a beneficiary of that calculation, I would say it's a win-win for both countries.
Ambassador Ms. Kevachenia, your initial thoughts, first of all, to this loaded question that we're dealing with this evening. Shifting sands or structural transformation? And how can I not talk about China when I ask you that question? Because as an ambassador in Beijing, you had to leave from the country as well. And the kind of pressures that Lithuania has been dealing with when it comes to the China challenge. So we've seen some shifting sands taking place in that respect as well.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Carnegie, for having me over. Definitely, you know, I'm a product of shifting sands and my country is a product of great transformations. Even before that, you know, I graduated school in 1990. My country reappeared on the map after 50 years of occupation. So sands have shifted for us in a major way, you know, and I mean, I remember very well personally that amazing, you know, feeling of almost intoxicating freedom, you know, of being suddenly able to travel, think whatever, or actually speak whatever you think. You know, we thought that this was the last shift for the better. You know, we won't be going to the earthquakes anymore. That will bring us back to the darker times. And I seem to be the only one born and having grown up in a dictatorship among all the things. So believe me, it's something, it demands a separate you know, conversation. But speaking about today and now, definitely sands have shifted for the world with the COVID, I guess, globally, right? But for us, it was probably the triple shifting again, COVID, unprecedented Chinese pressure we had to experience and survive, and we have, thank you, survived very well. And then Russian invasion against Ukraine, you know, it's a very triple sand shifting moment for my country. So definitely, you know, they're something that a small country in Eastern Europe that has already lived through a lot and has just achieved, you know, prosperity and developed country status, joined, you know, European Union, NATO, and had all the possible safeguards. We have found ourselves in the shifting sands again. Coming to the Indo-Pacific, yes, my country and many countries in Europe, in fact, had this very major pivot to Asia even before. But I have to say that for many of us, you know, that early pivot to Asia signified mostly engaging with China at the cost of any other relationship. Definitely for my country, because we're small, we can't be working with everyone, you know, and we have to prioritize. So several years ago, we have discovered we have hugely neglected everyone else at the expense of the relationship we are building with China, and we ended up in a very toxic dependency, which when they started the pressure really, was not a nice thing to survive at all. So after living through that, we have adopted a very fresh Indo-Pacific strategy. Yes, Lithuania too has adopted an Indo-Pacific strategy this last summer, which actually speaks out, you know, that need to engage with partners in the Indo-Pacific, which is, you know, it's the age of Indo-Pacific. We all know that 21st century is the century of Indo-Pacific, but to rather speak with countries who think and do in a much more similar way, behave in a way as per rules as we understand them, but not the ones who make us dependent. So here we are, you know, and definitely India plays a very important role in that Indo-Pacific strategy that we have embarked on.
Ambassador Verma, if I can come to you specifically about India's role, as Ambassador Miskevicenia just highlighted. First of all, what is your assessment of the way it is dealing with this geopolitical transition that we are seeing around us at this point?
Well, you see, for globalization to succeed, and it has been a fairly successful model of international cooperation globally, you require a stable geopolitical base. When you disrupt the stable geopolitical base, you tend to create new tensions in globalization. You know, much like you take a pizza base and you pull it off, you know, all the cheese and the toppings go, you know, they are stretched to their limit. So globalization today is stretched to its limit at a time when globalization is far more important to India than ever before. We are latecomers to globalization, as you know. We turned to the open world only in 91, 92. So it's about 30 odd years, which is in the life of a nation, not a very long period. But precisely at the time when we would like open markets, free flow of capital, free flow of technology, free flow of energy, the costs, the political and the security costs of India's international engagement have increased. Now, why is that? Because there's now a gap between the geopolitical foundation and the globalization that was built on this for the last 30 years. And you might ask, why is that structural transformation taking place in geopolitics? Because unfortunately, the big powers have lost the habit of working together. We find more points of friction than cooperation. You can see various instances of that. I mean, you can see it in the Security Council, you can see it in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you can see it in the lack of cooperation on non-proliferation and arms control, and the entire edifice has now come down. You see it in economic sanctions on one way or the other. Now, all these increased costs, not just for India, but also for countries placed in a similar position, you know, in the larger global south. And I think India's diplomacy has been extraordinarily successful, that despite these very great stresses in the international system, that we pulled off under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, the G20 success. That is extraordinary success given the fact that in various places that, what are the chances of the big powers getting back together? I think the sooner the good sense prevails, the better it is, because I think the sense of mutual accommodation, that there are limits to how far you can take conflict, has been lost along the way. Unfortunately, it is being restored through military means in Russia and the Ukraine conflict, and it is now a stalemated conflict for about 2 years. And we see the manifestations of that in various forms. We are today going at what, 6.57%. If we had a more conducive international environment, I'm sure we would have added another 2% to our GDP. So India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but we would have grown even faster. But having said that, I think our relationship with the United States has taken the stresses and strains of this disruption in the international system. The United States, and we've discussed this in the last 3 days, is extraordinarily important for India's development journey, for our regional engagement, for our international engagement. So I would hope that we can get through these strains, this period of instability, and get back. And actually, our India-US partnership will actually accelerate if the international systems become more conducive.
Ambassador Ellis, if I can come to you for a quick comment on that as well, because the way that the UK has been pushing forward when it comes to the AI advancement has been talked about positively.
Thanks very much. Yes, the Prime Minister sees this as an issue where you need some level of global cooperation to try and deal with the opportunity and the potential harm from AI. And so it's interesting, there was some debate, should you invite China to the AI summit he hosted? We did, because you have to try to see if you can create a kind of global attitude of the main economies towards the potential harm which is reached in AI. It's much harder to do that now. I always think now we were lucky in a way that the world was looking seriously at climate change in the 90s when it was capable of doing things at a global level. I think it'd be very hard to create the UNFCCC now. But just thinking about what people have been saying on this panel, when I think, what are we really doing with India? Essentially, countries like the United Kingdom, presumably Lithuania, the United States, we are saying we are trying to invest in increased trust in your country. And therefore, we have to be trustworthy. And I think it's not like a kind of passive thing. We are saying we are going to try and trust each other more on more difficult things. And that's quite hard. But essentially, things like the tech arrangement in the United States are kind of structurally saying we are now going to trust each other more. And it's quite hard, but trust isn't a stable, simple thing. You can actually increase it and decrease it by your own behavior. And that's what I think, essentially, the countries on this panel are trying to do. And it's hard, but it's a necessary thing.
We're completely out of time, unfortunately, but I feel like we've also thrown up a lot of interesting questions that we can continue to delve upon as far as these conversations continue, because a lot of these issues continue to remain challenges, but also throw up opportunities as far as the dynamics as they play out are concerned. So we're leaving it there for the moment, but thanks very much for this engaging conversation. And I like that there were these shades of optimism. But at the same time, we cannot not talk about the issues that definitely invite pessimism. So thank you very much. And we hope to touch upon these issues in time to come as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.